Thank you very, very much. That's a very peppy and inspirational and very nice introduction. I'm bound to disappoint thereafter. So what I'm going to do is just introduce our panel. Each of them is going to do about a 12 to 15 minute presentation. There's a tremendous amount of expertise in the room. Then they're each going to come up and then they're going to watch each other's presentations from down below. And thereafter, we will then have a 15 or 20 minute moderated conversation by myself trying to tackle what I think is one of the most important subjects. So I think without much further ado, I'm going to ask Rafael to come up. And Rafael is the professor at the Dyson School of Design, Engineering at Imperial and professor and director of the Wellbeing Technology Lab at the University of Sydney. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There I am. Well, everybody in this room already knows that the world is changing and changing very fast. The schools and workplaces of a few years from now will probably not look that much like the ones that we have today. And in these 3 days at CogX, people have been telling you about what the future of AI looks like, and it's obviously very difficult to predict. And one of the reasons it's so difficult is that technologies change us as much as we change them. Now, as a design engineer, someone who builds systems that will be used years from now, I need to think about the implications of my intentions. Intentionality matters. We generally reap what we sow. So what I will do today is tell you a bit about the seeds of 4 projects that we have been working on and describe what are the fruits that we got, the learning fruits that we got from each of them. First, and this is the ethos of my research lab, we think that all technologies should be designed to support psychological well-being. Every chair we sit on, maybe not this one so much, but every chair we sit on when we are in the office has been ergonomically designed to respect your physical health. Think about it. Every technology we use in the workplace, every tool we use in schools, if every app we use, every mobile phone had been designed to respect our psychological health, what will be the impact of that? So we think that to improve worldwide well-being, we need to design for well-being directly. And this is what we call positive computing, the design and development of technologies that support well-being. And this comes from a long tradition of science around well-being. And there are many different models. The most commonly used one is the clinical model. So if an employee is suffering from burnout, or a child in school is suffering from depression or anxiety, he will be treated by the GP, the psychiatrist, using a clinical model. In the clinical model, if they ask you some questions, if you score about some threshold, you are ill. If you are below that threshold, it means that you're doing well. Now, in the 1990s, a number of critics came up critiquing, saying that's not enough. We need to do better than that. They studied the people that are generally flourishing, that are doing really well, and what are the factors that make them different. And then looking at those factors and trying to design interventions that will help everyone else. Some of those factors are socio-emotional intelligence. This has picked up a lot in the business domain, and it has to do with managing emotions, empathy, and so on. Another one is self-determination theory, where the idea is that there are basic psychological needs that we need to be able to fulfill in order to flourish. There are measures, like subjective measures of well-being, like the ones that the Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman developed in the 1990s, or neuroscience and psychophysiology techniques that we can use to measure the impact on well-being. Now, in my research group, we have been focusing on 3 factors: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. We chose these 3 factors that Richard Ryan and Ed Desi call basic psychological needs, because there is thousands, literally thousands of papers showing that they support motivation and engagement in the workplace. They improve health outcomes in doctors and different type of therapies and in students. And these studies across thousands of papers show that there is cross-cultural, these apply in different cultures and different age groups, and more importantly, they give engineers and designers concrete constructs that we can take into account when we are building new products. So how can design engineers bring these considerations, these factors into the development of actual systems? What are the seeds that we engineers can plant so we can produce systems that support well-being? I will be telling you about 4 projects, and each of them has kind of what I consider a learning outcome for myself. The first one has to do with automation in the workplaces. As we have learned here in CogX, workplaces are changing very fast. We're increasingly automating all sorts of tasks in the workplaces. And generally, the discourse there is about improving efficiency. What we have been looking, particularly in this project, we look at what is the impact of automation on employees. What is the impact on their well-being? In this project, we work with Reach Out. It's a charity, wonderful charity with 1.6 million users, Australian youth, who go to there seeking help to deal better with difficult times. So one of the functionalities they have is peer support groups. The peer support groups have human moderators. They're generally volunteers. And they asked us to develop natural language processing techniques that can improve the efficacy and efficiency of these moderators. So we went and we started building the system that automated as much as we could from the process that the moderators had to do. What we found out roughly a year into the project is that that didn't work. People were not engaged, the moderators didn't like the system, and so we had to go back to the drawing board, and we understood that we were not putting enough focus on satisfying psychological needs. So we redesigned the system to support these needs, and now it's been over 2 years that they have used to process thousands of posts every week. And the posts are basically triage, that's quite the name of the product, into red, that means that someone has to respond as quickly as possible. Yellow, that means that there's no urgency. And green, saying to the moderators they don't need to manage that. And then there's an ultra red for cases of suicide and ideation and self-harm. So when there is extreme cases, that triggers a safety protocol. So protecting moderators' well-being was critical in this project. Their job is already very, very hard. It's a very highly emotional type of job. And one way to do this is to satisfy these psychological needs, bringing features, functionalities that increase the sense of autonomy they have about their jobs, their job descriptions. Functionalities that increase the sense of competence about what they're doing. Remember, these are volunteers, they're not psychologists, they are people with lived experiences about these problems that the young people have. And then connecting them to other people in the community, improving relatedness. We also, in many projects, bring other factors. In this one, we look at compassion. There's a lot of compassion therapy research that tells you that people that are going through this sort of work are at the risk of empathic distress. And one way to deal with that is to show them the positive impact that the efforts they do have. So what we learned from this project is that we need to design autonomous systems for autonomous humans. I want, when I build these systems, to have measures that tell me when a design feature has an impact on the sense of autonomy that people have. So in this case, if I'm building a feature that allows a moderator to assign the task to someone else, possibly because they have more experience about the topic, I want to see how that improves their sense of autonomy about the way they go in their job. And I can ask them questions that have been validated in many psychological studies. So that was the first project. The second project deals with mental health more specifically. In the sense, this was a project funded by the Movember Foundation trying to address the problem of mental health in male-dominated industries. Men have different challenges to women because when they're having psychological problems, they're less likely to seek help. So in this project, we incorporated behavioral activation therapy and mindfulness training into a process that produced a tool, and eventually we released it, ran a randomized control trial, like the largest randomized control trial ever for a workplace mental health technology. And we were able to show that the efficacy had a 2-week increased productivity on the workforce. So a very significant economic impact for the industry partners that contribute to the project. Now, in this project, there were 2 learning outcomes that I think were important to me. The first one is showing that health AI, health technologies can improve health in the workplace. And the second one is also connected because also we did a lot of co-design activities, like in the first one, that technologies, for them to be successful, need to involve users from early on. That's an essential aspect in all our projects. The third project has to do with affective computing, using technologies, machine learning to detect emotions. So in this case, you can see a writer, and the system will automatically detect the mental state of this person. We have published some books and papers on this topic looking at the different emotions that come into play in learning and in different business contexts. And then we have brought this into a platform called EQ Clinic that is about improving nonverbal behaviors, communication skills in medical students. For about 3 years, we have run this with about 500 students per semester. And what the platform does is similar to a telehealth platform, creates automatic feedback about their communication, adds also the feedback from the tutors and from the patients, or we call them simulated patients, and this provides feedback about their communication skills. And again, using randomized control trials, we were able to show that the system can help improve communication skills. So the learning outcome for me from this project was that learning technologies can help us develop human skills, things like empathy and communication that we normally don't think about. We tend to think more about efficacy, but the other aspects that we can bring with AI. So the fourth and last project was a study we did with colleagues at the University of Sydney for the Department of Education. And what the secretary asked is for us to think about the curriculum that will be used in schools for children that were born today, that will wear, or when we wrote the report, that will grow up in a world of AI. And so we interviewed and had workshops with academics in different disciplines, from engineering to health to education, etc. And there were 2 main conclusions from the report. The first one is that we need to support what they call generic skills. But rather than doing it as it's often done, that it's in very general way, we have to do it in a specific, concrete business problem, a specific discipline. People have to become good at something, and that's where you learn to have those generic skills. And the second one is that students need to learn about the impact of AI, how AI can be used, for example, to manipulate them, to change their behavior, and so on. So I want to focus, to close, on this second conclusion that came out of the report, one that as a parent has been a lot in my mind lately, and this has to do, for example, with YouTube, that it's the most commonly e-learning platform. We all go, schools, teachers, go to YouTube to learn. And the interaction with YouTube is already driven by AI. And as mentioned at the beginning, all digital environments change us as much as we change them. But AI has the potential to supercharge these changes. It can help educate, It can help us learn about new perspectives, new views of the world, but it can also be used to influence and dominate us. And schools and universities have a role to play to teach about bias and influence. But also, do those who design the systems underpinning this change. As Superman's mom said, with power comes great responsibility. And we have the responsibility to sow the right seed. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Our next speaker is Ian Goldin, who is the director of the Oxford Martin Programme on Technological and Economic Change. Ian.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to think about some of the mega changes that are going to affect the world of work and education going forward. This is the vital topic, and it's one which, of course, we know very little about. It's one where, sorry about this, it's one where the changes, let me just find my slideshow and then I will be with you. Can we get on the screen? Where the changes happening are so rapid that predicting the future is simply impossible. The one thing we know is that this is going to be the slowest midday session you attend for the rest of your lives. And that's because the pace of innovation, the number of brilliant brains around the world is growing in extraordinary ways. When I first went to China in the 80s, there were 70 people doing doctoral degrees. This year, there are 280,000. And it's not just the brilliant people around the world that are thinking in new ways, the new Mozart, Shakespeare's, and Einsteins, that randomly distributed will come up with ideas which will transform the world. It's that people are connecting, that people working in teams, sparking off each other, like is happening at CogX sessions, at a different speed to anything before. So the lab I created in Oxford, working on new cures for cancer, works on a 24-hour research cycle with data in the cloud, with labs in Shanghai, Mumbai, Paris, New York, and San Francisco. This is very different to anything that ever happened before. And that's why the pace of innovation is accelerating, formal and informal. We move from a world where only 2 billion people were literate before the Berlin Wall came down 30 years ago in 1989, to a world today where there are 6.5 billion literate people. That's 4.5 billion more literate people. If you believe in brain power as the transformation force in the world, expect an exciting time. Kids today, to live to 100, we have no idea what technologies will be around. But we do know that what's happening is leading to a much healthier, better world. It's leading to a world which is unprecedented in progress, where average life expectancy has increased by 20 years over the last 35 years, where illiteracy has gone down by 70% and the number of desperately poor people has gone down by 300 million. There's lots to celebrate and there's lots to understand that comes from education and learning. Simple ideas like smoking kills you, wearing a safety belt saves your life, spreading around the world, and very complicated ones like those embedded in vaccines, in cures for cancer. So if things are so great, why are people so angry and what's happening? What can we think about the future of work and education? Well, firstly, while the walls are coming down between countries, they're going up within them. Inequality growing everywhere. And the financial crisis is a very salutary reminder that brilliant people make brilliant mistakes. 20,000 PhDs from very great places, including my own, Oxford University, with the best institutions like the treasuries and central banks, the IMF, which is the elite of global governance, failed to manage this complex dynamic system. So we need to be very humble. We need to understand why people distrust education, professionals, experts in these elite cities, in these elite conferences. We don't know what's going on. We're out of control. And this pullback, this pushback,
many traders were expecting a new record to be
set. We
set
also need
this
to
year.
recognize that the market is not going to give us a response to what we need. This tuna that just went up sold for $3.1 million. the rhinoceros horn worth more than gold. More and more high-tech poachers and fishermen chasing the remaining resources, we get extinction. So the market doesn't provide the answer. But of course, states are short-term as well, acting in their national interests. So we need to think in new ways, and we need education systems that go beyond our current incentive structures, that are different. A continuation of business as usual in education will simply lead to catastrophic failure of the world. New education systems like the one that I'm the chair of, this is a new economics curriculum, a mass online economics curriculum, free, open source, I believe are going to provide much of the answer. But we need to think and learn in new ways if we're to stop this pushback. This new rejection of connectiveness, this rejection of elites, of expertise, just as happened after the Renaissance, when the Inquisitions killed all innovation in Europe and led to religious wars. We're going through a similar period. We need to understand that education in itself is not an objective. The majority of suicide bombers have tertiary degrees. ISIS is not a stupid institution. It's a battle of ideas that's engaging. And in this battle of ideas, we all need to engage. Being a bystander gives the space to extremists on all sides. We also need to understand that technology is a dual-edged sword, leading to enormous possibilities, but also to very, very deep questions and potentially disastrous outcomes, as we've seen, of course, with the corruption of elections, with Facebook, and with many other things. The back mouse, a wild mouse, the front one, a genetically modified one. This is the sort of thing we're doing in Oxford with very well looked after mice. The back one drops out after 20 minutes, 200 meters, the front one goes for 2 kilometers, 2 hours. The enhancement capabilities which are happening now in genomics raise very fundamental questions about the creation of superhumans. Are we going to reconfigure our children? Are we going to enhance them to be smarter? Are we going to give them chemicals, as some of the kids from posh schools take before they do our entrance exams in Oxford, before they write them? Are we going to send these in sachets to poor kids around the world so that they can compete? These are the problems that come out of this technological leapfrogging that's advancing not at exponential speed, but at super exponential speed. Deep ethical questions and questions about how we engage in this battle of ideas, how we ensure that the internet really does lead to what the dreamers that invented it in the early 90s wanted, which is the death of distance, the world is flat, the end of history. These tropes, these fantasies, we know now to be absolutely wrong. Place more important than ever, elite education more insignificant than ever, the gaps wider than ever. And how do we ensure in this system not only that it has trust and integrity, but that as it moves into the Internet of Things and into our bodies, as it is surely doing at rapid speed, it gives humans augmentation to be good, not to be bad? How do we ensure that AI doesn't take our jobs? Work we're doing in Oxford suggests that about 40% of UK jobs are vulnerable to this over the next 20 years, about half of US jobs, about 60% of Chinese jobs, about 70% of Ethiopian jobs. So what is the future of work in this world where machines do anything that's repetitive and rules-based? Service centers are already getting higher customer satisfaction ratings from AI than from human service representatives. And this is the beginning of the story. So how we feel about technology matters. It's not because they exist, it's because we want them. Germany has banned GMOs and nuclear power. Societies can reject technologies. We will break up these monopolies that are running the internet and other things. And what we've seen in the US, of course, is the turbocharging of this into a new Cold War. The banning of firms with 5G technology and a war which is certainly developing around data. How we in the UK respond to this, whether we stay joined up or withdraw, whether we engage in protectionism, will shape the future, not only of technology in the UK, but of the way that we fit in. When you look at our beautiful world from space, you see no borders. You see this extraordinary web of connectivity. This is the opportunity that comes. I'm optimistic because I think we're learning in new ways. The Renaissance, which I've worked a lot on, was essentially a white male affair. Now we have the full talent pool of the world. This gives me a cause for optimism. I'm optimistic because one person created a global movement through Me Too that made sexual harassment less acceptable. I'm optimistic because I never thought in my lifetime a tide would swing so rapidly in Ireland that it could have a gay prime minister in a Catholic country. I'm optimistic because, although I don't agree with all his policies, someone with no political party was able to become president of France on a pro-globalization open ticket. I'm optimistic because a 16-year-old schoolgirl could create a mass movement that changed the way that kids are thinking around the world. New ways of thinking enable us to empathize, enable us to transform the world in dramatic ways. They're an opportunity to do what humans uniquely can do, that machines, I don't believe, will do even in the youngest people in this room's lifetimes, which is experience empathy, to make judgment, to have ethical foundations, to be wise. Parents ask me when they come to Oxford, should their children do maths or should their children study languages or classics or whatever else? And the answer is, of course, it doesn't matter. Be curious, explore. Machines will get very good at maths and make that redundant for humans pretty soon. But understanding what's going on, understanding the connectedness and being fact-based. We can celebrate the fact for the first time in history that the world leaders have listened to scientists. Too little, too late, but things are happening. We can see the evidence. This is work I've done which shows what will happen to Florida with climate change. We're beginning to understand our Earth and our connectiveness in new ways. Even mainstream publications are getting it. And of course, that science is allowing us to have new technologies. So I'm optimistic that we can use technologies and we can use new learning methods to come together, to create a world where it's not man against machine, but man and woman with machine. If we can do that, we can all rock on to very happy old age. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Our next and last speaker is Amel Karboul, the CEO of the Education Outcomes Fund for Africa and the Middle East. Welcome.
Thank you. I need your help. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. So I'd like to start by saying that today we are facing a global learning crisis, despite all the progress within in literacy. And despite the progress in access that we've made, we still are facing a learning crisis. And why do I call it learning crisis, not education crisis? Is because around 150 million kids are out of school today, but even more, around 330 million are in school and basically not learning. And this is a global phenomenon, and I think even in such rich countries as the UK, you see that. The place where I come from, the Middle East, has the highest youth unemployment in the world. Around, in the next decade or so, we'll have 100 million youth entering the job market. Today, 40% of those are unemployed. Yeah? So the question, and many of those have even tertiary education, so we are kind of facing universities that are churning out unemployed people. So I was very lucky to be part of an initiative led by Gordon Brown in his function as UN Envoy for Global Education, which was called the Education Commission, and we came up with the Learning Generation Report. And there is a triangle. One is the learning crisis, so the kids that are in school and not learning. The other piece that we've heard here before is the numbers of job disappearing. Between 40% to 80% of the job are going to disappear due to automation and technology, depending on the country and the continent. And the third, let's say, triangle corner is that if you take a continent like Africa, some countries, let's say, Eritrea or Somalia, even if every student became teacher, like every student, no engineers, no doctors, no lawyers, no one, you wouldn't have enough teachers. So those demographic changes are happening basically in those places where we estimate that by 2030, around, less than 6,000 days from now, 1 billion young Africans are going to enter the job market. So we've never had to educate as many people as fast with so few resources as we do today. And that's kind of a big challenge. And these 1 billion youth, are they going to be, roaming cities unemployed and becoming a security and migration and whatever challenge, or are these going to be the innovators and leaders of tomorrow? And can technology play a role? So if we can't transform educate, or we can't achieve the goals by building more schools and hiring more teachers only, or building more universities, how are we going to overcome those challenges? So this is where technology and AI can play a role. So you can look at that triangle, I call it the disaster triangle, and just weep and think it's all doom and gloom for the continent, or you can think, okay, what can we do? So in the work we've done around the Learning Generation Report, the good news is we can do something about it. So if countries move as fast as the 25% best improvers within their income level, so low income, middle income, high income, then we can have within a generation every child in school and learning. And what do we need to do about this, and how technology can play a role? Performance. I always say education is the least reformed institution of the world. If you take a teacher from 100 years ago, or university professor, maybe, and put them today in a school, they probably can perform up to 80%, I would guess, of what they've been doing. If you take a doctor from 100 years ago and put them in a hospital today, they probably will be able to do close to nothing. Yeah? And so the question is, how can we increase the performance of our education systems? Technology can play a role, for example, because I have two examples. Lango here helps government and schools to monitor student attendance. Nova Pioneers, these are two in using deep analytics in Africa to look at, our children are learning. Because the interesting thing is only half of the countries have standardized assessments, and actually in primary, and even less than half in secondary school. So how are you supposed to actually, govern, be it in policy or actually for a teacher, if you don't know if the children are learning? And all the measurement around learning and performance management technology can play a huge role, make it much cheaper and more accessible and almost real time, basically, so that you can follow that. It can give access. Shula in Kenya is one. There is an SMS story project in Papua New Guinea. There is a bigger project that I think is amazing in the Amazonas Media Center solution, where you have only few content teachers in the center in Manaus, in the capital, working with over 2,500 coaching development teachers in every village, and they could give access to almost 500,000 children to attend secondary school, which in the past wouldn't be able to attend any education. The sad thing is that a lot of these technological solutions are small, are very local, are underfunded, and really are not kind of collaborating to kind of make a big movement, that we need for this 1 billion youth. So what we've started, the Learning Generation Report had few recommendations around performance, around innovation, around inclusion, but also around finance. And today, since November 2017, I'm leading one of those initiatives, which is the Education Outcomes Fund for Africa and Middle East. And what we're trying to do is, it's a $1 billion fund to pay for success, so to pay for learning results. So we're not paying for salaries or building, we're paying for children who are learning. And so one is, we feel like the way you pay for a thing does matter. So if we want to achieve more results, not just bodies in classrooms, then maybe we should pay for learning. We pay share for those outcomes. But even more importantly is, we want to actually move the money, especially because we are kind of a blend between philanthropy and impact investing, from looking at at investment opportunities to investment necessities. So we're talking here about SDGs and how to achieve those. Today, the investment and the asset classes and the investment tools don't work for our continent in Africa. They're not long-term enough, they're just too expensive, they don't fit. We have to create new investment tools. And today also the money goes to opportunities. So you go around and find this amazing startup or this amazing person and you invest there and expect certain returns, but we want to move the money to investment necessities, to say, this is what we care about. One of our projects, we care about that there's 150,000 children who are out of school in northern Ghana today, go into remedial training for 9 months, and then integrate public school. And we're going to pay for that. And we're going to pay for this long term. We're going to give them money in a unrestricted, not like a government or grant or aid money that is super bureaucratic. We're going to give it like an investor gave maybe Twitter or Facebook at the beginning, the money. And so we can unleash innovation entrepreneurship for people to find solutions. We are not going to tell them how to do it, but what we care about. And so we can create a vibrant ecosystem of entrepreneurs, nonprofit, civil society who can help, harness the public truth system. So we're putting kind of aid and philanthropy on its head. We're bringing impact investors in. We're transforming the way non-state actors, if you want to call them, this is the jargon of education, which are basically social entrepreneurs and NGO are funded. Pushing the boundary a lot. It felt like the last 1.5 years like building a plane while flying, with an amazing team, but really seeing a lot of resistance, which is really interesting, means like we are changing something. Governments and agents which supposedly should actually love us. Imagine, I'm going to tell you, taxpayer money, philanthropic money is only paying for results, nothing else. Extremely also resisting this and from other, stakeholders. But we hope that by, there is a, maybe it sounds a bit maybe too big or arrogant, but we really believe in it that these outcome funds which we're creating are going to be for the social sector and development sector what venture capital funds were for the tech industry. The beginning, as long as one person invested in a small tech idea, it didn't really fly. It only flowed with venture capital funds, and it became an asset class. No one really believed in it. We're building the first at-scale outcome payment fund for a social challenge, and we hope that in some years, thousands of these funds will exist. So we're kind of transforming development challenge, which is an education in our case, into an investable opportunity.
Okay, we're going to do some, take a seat anywhere, some baseline setting. So the first thing I'm going to ask the panel, some of you in your talk cited it, but just a quick lightning round. What percentage of jobs are at risk?
Well, I have ranges of 40 to 60%, but I'm not an expert on that topic. So.
You said it, I think, yeah.
That's a question that could take hours. We have in Oxford the group that's done most of the work on this, the group I created. We have high numbers. 47% of US workers, as Carl Frey, Michael Osborne, and others work, and my work. But the range is huge. I mean, McKinsey says 8%, OECD says 13%. We think we're right. They all use our data. There's a lot of assumptions behind what one's thinking. What we're not talking about is what's actually going to happen. Okay, and we're also not talking about the new jobs. Those are the two big uncertainties. But I've also done a BBC program called Will AI Kill Development? And I interviewed a lot of people. One Sobot, for example, an automated sewing machine now can produce 300,000 T-shirts a year. Okay. 100 of these would produce all the T-shirts in the world. And the people in Bangladesh are saying, what is our future? In Nairobi, the call centers, they're going to disappear within the next 5 years. So I think it's dramatic, and I think it's particularly developing countries that are going to feel it first.
So let me drill. Okay, Amel, and then I'll come back to you.
No, I mean, as you said, it raises from 10% to 80%, and depends on what countries. I'm definitely sure that I think this is working. Sorry, thanks. In our continent and elsewhere, I think the worrying piece is that there will be kind of high-skilled jobs for extremely high-skilled people, and then maybe some jobs that you can't basically kill, but what's happening with that kind of middle, and are we maybe redefining jobs? Like if you look at a few hundred years ago, the word job didn't exist. Like you were born a slave or serf or monarch, or maybe art, handicraft, and when your dad was a blacksmith, you didn't think about what job you're going to do, it became. So in a way, jobs is industrialization and these last centuries. So the question is, are we, I love looking at big picture and historic thing, and I think like the printing press was a technology that really changed the world and made the world we live in here. Internet, AI is another technology. We don't know how the world would look like, but definitely very different, yeah.
Just briefly, the Gutenberg press, of course, led to religious war, but also led to Michelangelo and Copernicus and everyone else. The important thing about jobs is that what everyone's forgetting when they say net, like the McKinsey's or OECD, place really matters more than ever. So it might well be the case that we have record low unemployment in London, record high salaries, or in New York or San Francisco. Tell people in the Midwest or the north of England this, and they point to the record high housing prices, the record high transport costs and congestion, and say we can't go there. So that's the issue. It's not so much whether there'll be jobs, but where the jobs are and whether people can get them.
So let's just get some precision. Is your view net? Everybody agrees that the nature of work is going to radically transform. The bigger debate is, do we net get to the same place but with very different jobs, unevenly distributed, or do you think that we net lose jobs as well?
I'm convinced that for the next 30, 40 years, we net lose lots and lots of jobs. The long term, there might be a very different sort of world. Right. Why would you employ someone in a repetitive, rules-based task when a machine can do it 24 hours a day at a much, much lower cost?
Okay. So just to, do you want to come in on that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I guess another consequence I see possible is especially now that we have all these movements against democracy, what happens is that when there is a very, very serious economic crisis, you have a dictator that to gain power will start a war. I come from Argentina, and that's what happened in Falklands and in both sides of the battle. You know, it was a government who was looking to use nationalism as a way of taking power again. And regrettably, this is going to bring economic crises, and one has to be careful about those unintended consequences other consequences.
So it's worth for the kind of those of us who are the non-experts in the audience just to kind of pause for a moment and reflect on the magnitude of what's being said. The two poles of the debate on the future of work are between one group of people who say net there's going to be a significant loss of jobs, and another group who says at best we're probably going to be net neutral, but the changing nature of work is going to be spectacular. In both scenarios, you either have very significant large numbers of people out of work or a generational gap where you're needing to reskill people into a new form of work. And the reskilling of people, you know, the kind of old easy adage that you're going to take coal miners and going to put them into green retrofitters of buildings. The coal miners are in West Virginia and the green retrofitters and solar panel installers are in California. You ain't reskilling those people. And some of those people are at stages of their lives where the reskilling is a much bigger economic, social, and political challenge. So I guess the question is, if the best case scenario is net the same amount of jobs with a radical reskilling and therefore a generational disruption, in all plausible scenarios, we are going to have, unlike any other comparable moment in the last 200 years, significant percentages of our populations concentrated in some inconvenient places being angry and disaffected. Is that likely?
It's already
happening.
Okay.
That's what we got.
Fine.
That's Brexit. That's Trump.
Great.
That's Le Pen. That's
right.
AFD. That's what it is.
And if you're not enjoying it now, it ain't getting better.
Yeah, and it's a vicious circle because
Right.
you slow the economy down, you get more unemployment, you get more angry people, you get a race to the bottom on taxes, you know, from a new government coming in here and from the US, and therefore there's less money to redistribute, and then people get more angry. So yes, it's a bad cycle to be in. That's why we have to break it.
Okay, and so now I'm going to go in order and say, what are your best ideas for addressing what has to be thought of as a political tsunami about to run over us, right? So if we're not going to sit like deers in the headlights and just go, this is about to happen to us, and the other, you know, pressing analog is climate, and we probably have to answer both of those questions in the same way and with the same degree of urgency. where does salvation lie? What are your best ideas? And what are the things that are going to be at the order of magnitude capable of meeting the nature of this challenge?
Wow, that's a tough question. I think we're going to start questioning. I mean, there are some similarities between what is happening now and what happened in 1840, when, for example, in the UK, they went from not having any trains to be full of trains. And at the same time, you had John Stuart Mill and Karl Marx writing books with completely different perspectives of how the role of policy, the role of humans. And I think the sort of questions that are being raised now is going to be very similar. What is freedom? What does it mean to be a free individual? And of course, there will be multicultural perspectives that we didn't have back then, at least not those two individuals.
I think what's behind this is when things change more rapidly, people get left behind more quickly. And in that process, when you have a race to the bottom on taxation, you have the opposite of what needs to happen. You need to invest faster. Everything is out of date more quickly. Our transport systems, our education systems, our health systems, our ideas. And moving, this isn't the flexibility of Maggie Thatcher of labor markets. That's already been done. This is a flexibility of, can you move to where the job is? Can you reskill? Can you get the new education system or the new health system? Can you move? And that requires more investment. And so I think the only answer is a rethinking of the role of the state in investment, higher levels of investment, taxation, and the ability of people to move. What does that mean? It means housing markets have to work. People have to be able to come to London. It means transport systems have to be effective. You have to be able to fit people in at cheaper, affordable costs to move further, quicker. Now the inner cities are occupied by yuppies. The suburbs are occupied by middle-class people, and poor people that used to live in the inner cities can't be there anymore, and they can't commute anymore because they have to be an hour and a half or 2 hours away to afford to live. And that is not a recipe for a dynamic, successful society. So my feeling is it's about investing in infrastructure, education, health, and change, and that's going to require, the bottom line is it's going to require higher levels of taxation. By the way, that also deals with the climate change question, because we're going to have to radically go to zero carbon. That's going to create lots of jobs too, if we do it quickly enough. And the only thing I think I'll ever agree with Theresa May on is what she's done as an outgoing president for the country, which is to move to zero carbon by 2030. That's a big thing.
Yeah. I mean, if I wouldn't say education, it would be strange, investing more in education. But I do believe that social unrest are going to be more and more. I mean, I spend a lot of time in the Middle East and Africa, and it's a different situation, and also time in Europe and the US, so kind of I see the inequality will increase and we will have more social unrest, and we won't be able to build as tall walls within the country. So the question is, I'm also totally pro-government playing a bigger and different role. I never thought I would say that. I grew up in a household with a father who was social democrat and I was much more liberal. But today I feel the question is how these investments will happen. How can government transform their role to be, I call it commissioner for outcomes, like their role is to deliver more for the citizen, and they can play a huge role in how they spend their money, not just what they spend it in, which I think we talk about education and health, but how do they spend that, and how do they work in this triangle with private sector and civil society, and can we find new ways of type of cooperation so that the money spent really achieves better results for the right type of people, you know?
So let me ask a final question. Is the sorts of things that you suggested, Ian, which are infrastructure and taxes, most importantly transport, these are things that are not easily achieved by the private sector. They need an active role of government. And it seems we're caught in a bit of a doom loop or a paradox here, because the kind of governments that get elected on populist tickets are not the kind of governments that are interested in broad 20 years socially beneficial infrastructure investments, different approaches to taxation. They give their citizens quick sugar fixes in response to anger on the streets, and anger on the streets doesn't necessarily equate with the kind of solutions that you need to build a long-term future. Now, I'm just congenitally an optimist, so does that not mean that we have to find alternate sources of power mobilization, financing, to be able to kind of tackle this in the short term, because it's urgent, while we tackle the broader agenda of taking back the state and putting progressive people back in power who are capable of winning this? But we need some short-term bridge solutions right now. I think your fund is at least one of them, but is that not the case?
I will give a pragmatic answer. I was cabinet minister in a government, and honestly, like what I did personally and within ours, I talked about the short term, but worked about the long term. You know, like I spent 80% of my time working on the longer strategic. I was responsible for tourism, 8 to 12% of Tunisia's GDP. I knew that the structural problems are huge and we need 7 to 11 years to solve them. That's what I spent 80% of my time with. But I discovered very quickly when I was speaking about that, no one wanted to listen to it. You know, people wanted to talk about today. So in communication, I was speaking 80% about the short term. In real life, I was working on it. I know it sounds like kind of, but it was a pragmatic solution that kind of, in that sense, helped. Can you translate this everywhere? Probably not. We were a technocrat government in a very specific situation. But I do feel that, like looking today at my country this year, we're going through elections. Topics like education, where you never actually used to win elections with, are now coming up again. I think this sense of urgency of people seeing, you know, the world of jobbers changing, they seeing the children maybe, you know, have to struggle more than, you know, they did, a lot of freelance jobs, you know, and so kind of a stronger focus on things like education and health is coming from people who are gonna vote. I hope so.
Yeah. The private sector can play a massive role in the sorts of work that you're doing and that you're doing, Amel. On social impact investing, social outcome funds are terrific things, but I don't believe they're going to happen without, firstly, changes in public policy. You know, I've worked on project finance, the disaster of some of what's gone on with project finance. People are paying much more than they should for hospitals, for example, that have been done by the private sector than if they'd been done by the public sector. So getting that regulatory environment right for public-private partnerships is important. But also I believe we're underestimating the electorate. The populists have won because they're actually telling the truth. Governments have let them down. You know, the financial crisis was a total failure of expertise. The London elite don't know what's going on in big parts of the country, just like the New York or San Francisco elite don't know. And that anger is a real anger based on people's experience. And unless you address that experience and have a narrative, which is how you can help people across the country have a better life, I don't think you deserve to be in power. So I think that the challenge is not short-term, long-term. I think it's about telling a compelling story about why people should vote for you and trust you. And that is really something which one has to win the argument on. One has to demonstrate that one isn't part of the old group. It beggars belief to me that people are voting for the current group of politicians. But it's 100,000, you know, Conservative Party members in their old constituencies, average age of 55, who are going to nominate the next Prime Minister of the UK. This is not a democratic decision about who the Prime Minister is going to be. Someone else must be able to do better than that.
So I think it's not necessarily a short thing. I kind of agree with the previous speakers, in particular with what Ian was saying. I think it's rebalancing of public private powers. Personally, I think in this new discussion that we are having and we have to have, the third sector, the non-for-profits, will start becoming more important, and a lot of those services will eventually, I'm hoping, will start being provided by, structured by the government, but then provided by a non-for-profit type of structure. That's my naive understanding.
We're going to have time for a question. Please.
I'd just like to hear your views on universal basic income.
All right, there are 5 reasons why UBI is a very bad idea. Firstly, if you do the arithmetic, it simply doesn't add up. I've done it, for example, putting the UK onto the minimum wage, about £10.70 an hour, not very much. That would be the entire budget. The entire budget. There would be nothing left for health, education, or anything. It's simply a arithmetic fallacy. The second reason it's a bad idea is that it would increase poverty. Why? Because the targeted benefits that now go for disability benefit, for child benefit, for housing benefit, for unemployment benefit, for sickness benefit would no longer exist. Everyone would be getting the same amount, and it would be less than the people that are currently getting targeted benefits get. The third reason I object to it is because I think it's ethically unsound. I don't believe we should be giving billionaires money. I think we should be targeting our money. Universal means universal. Everyone gets it. We should be targeting our money at people that are deserved to get it. The fourth reason I don't believe in it is because all the evidence from paying people to... It comes from a belief that we're going to have mass unemployment and we should pay people to stay at home and work. All the evidence on that shows that that leads to massive social dislocation. These are the diseases of despair of the Midwest of the US. Crack addicts, other opiate addicts, suicide, divorce, crime, depression. You look at it, when people are paid to stay at home, they get very, very angry. And the reason is clear, because we get much more from our lives by being with colleagues, by meaning from work, by contributing, by social networks, by learning at work, etc., etc. None of us would want to be paid to stay at home. Why should we condemn other people to do it? And the fifth reason, which I think is the most important reason, I think it's a terrible idea, it's postponing a fundamental conversation we all need to have, which is what is the future of work? This is a red herring. This is a political sop, which a bizarre coalition of Silicon Valley libertarians and left-wing trade unionists put out as what the future holds, rather than us discussing part-time work, paid work for being at home, childcare and other work, creative industry work, what humans should do that machines cannot do. That's what we should be thinking about the future of work, and we should be thinking about much more leisure in a distributed way and a much better way of embracing the future than UBI. But I think the UBI debate is dangerous because it's pushing that debate away and putting center stage a different debate, which I think is a very dangerous one. So otherwise I like it.
Now give us at least an argument for it.
Honestly, I wouldn't. I mean, I fought for, including in our country, for example, we have subvention, subvention, how do you call them in English?
Social Security.
Yeah, like no support, like that goes across the line for, let's say, for products or for things. Huh? Subsidy, yeah, subsidy, sorry. So, like I fought for rather using technology and to define, in our case, which are the 800,000 poorest family, and to just kind of support these families rather than spreading around, because I feel, and this is some work that we're, for example, the fund we're doing, we're trying a new innovation which we call cohort pricing. So in a way, we pay more for children with disability, we pay more for rural girls, etc. I'd rather actually accept and admit that your postcode still defines who you become. I don't believe in this rubbish that if you work hard you can do everything. It's basically not true. If you start from here and you start from here and we have to get to E, and then I don't see where that kind of, you can work as hard as you can, but the person is there. So it's more, how can we use government resources through taxations and others to kind of support, to kind of, that people start from more closer areas, and that goes through investing more in families and children that need it.
You're going to get the last word, and we try to get off the stage, so please.
Adding something to this, I think maybe the economists are already working on this, but looking at what has happened in countries like Argentina, Venezuela, where inequity produce very serious social disruption, and this has happened since I was a child. And you can see with that you get into power autocrats, people that, and they've tried, in Argentina, for example, they have tried systems where the government tries to subsidize, and it doesn't work, and for all the reasons that Ian described. And it wasn't a UBI, but those models have similar problems. When you pay people to stay at home, people don't get their psychological needs satisfied. And when you are not, your psychological needs are not satisfied, you seek ways of doing it outside with drugs, addictions, etc. So it's not a good life. That's not, I personally think, is a dystopian world. We should be seeking something else. And I'm an engineer, so I believe, or I look at technologies as opportunity, but also we have come to realize all these negative aspects, and we need to deal with that.
So thank you very, very much to Amel, to Ian, to Rafael. And I'll just say that I think the two great challenges of our time are inequality and climate, and the future of work sits at the center of trying to address both of those, as well as restructuring the way our states, our societies produce, distribute, and consume everything. So no small challenge, and we confront it, and with people like this on the stage, I feel more confident that we can tackle it. Ollie.